The American football team's journey began under clear skies and high hopes. It was the spring of 1999, and the team was traveling to a crucial away game in a remote town known for its enthusiastic, if boisterous, local fans. The team's chartered plane was a small, reliable aircraft, a model often praised for its stability on short regional flights. For the players, coaches, and staff on board, the trip was routine, an expected part of the grueling sports season. Yet as the plane lifted off, none could have predicted the chain of events that would soon turn their lives upside down. In the early minutes of the flight, everything seemed normal. The players joked and reviewed plays, their voices filling the cabin with a familiar camaraderie. The pilots, experienced and steady, maintained their course, navigating over a sprawling forest region known for its dense canopy and unpredictable weather patterns. But as the plane crossed into a more remote stretch of wilderness, ominous clouds began gathering on the horizon. Weather reports had hinted at a possible storm, but no one on board gave it much thought. After all, the plane was built to withstand turbulence. Suddenly, without warning, the storm unleashed its fury. Fierce winds battered the fuselage, rain pelted the windows like 1,000 needles, and lightning cracked violently across the sky. The pilots struggled to maintain control, their hands gripping the yoke with desperate determination. The plane shook violently as it was tossed like a leaf in a tempest. Communication with air traffic control became sporadic, interrupted by static and heavy interference. Panic quietly began to ripple through the cabin as the passengers sensed the growing danger. Then came the critical moment, a mechanical failure. One of the engines sputtered, then went silent. The second engine groaned under the strain. The aircraft was losing altitude fast. The pilots radioed a distress call, but the dense storm and remote location distorted the message. Instruments flickered erratically. The plane descended uncontrollably, a powerless beast caught in nature's wrath. In the chaos, some players instinctively clasped hands, others braced themselves, eyes wide with fear. The crash was sudden. A violent jolt as the plane collided with towering trees, tearing through branches and twisting metal. The sound was a deafening cacophony of shattering glass, splintering wood, and twisting metal. Then silence, broken only by the groans of the injured and the ominous creaking of the wreckage settling deep within the forest. The team was scattered among the debris, many shaken, some unconscious, but miraculously, most alive. As the survivors gathered their wits, the magnitude of their situation began to sink in. They were stranded miles from civilization, deep within an unforgiving wilderness. Their plane was destroyed beyond repair, their supplies scattered or lost. The storm still raged above, the forest eerily alive with the sounds of wind, rain, and distant wildlife. Yet amidst the destruction, a flicker of determination glowed within the group. These were athletes, fighters by nature, now forced to battle not an opponent on the field, but the raw forces of nature itself. In the hours following the crash, the team's leaders quickly took stock of their situation. The coaches, medical staff, and senior players assessed injuries and tended to the wounded. Despite bruises, broken bones, and shock, the survivors knew that waiting passively was not an option. They began to organize, pooling what little resources remained and preparing to face the challenges ahead. The forest that had swallowed their plane was both enemy and ally, a source of shelter and danger. The fateful flight that had begun with excitement and promise ended in catastrophe, but it also marked the beginning of an extraordinary story. It was a story of survival against impossible odds, of courage and unity in the face of despair. The crash was just the opening chapter. What followed would test the limits of human endurance and spirit. The team's fate was uncertain, but their will to live burned fiercely, even in the heart of the darkest forest. The moments immediately following the crash were a blur of pain, confusion, and disbelief. The American football team, once full of energy and confidence, now found themselves scattered amidst the wreckage of their shattered plane, deep within a dense and uncharted forest. The forest was unlike anything many of them had seen before. Towering trees with thick, tangled underbrush, suffocating shadows, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. It was a world apart from the stadium lights and roaring crowds they were used to. As the adrenaline began to fade, reality settled in with harsh clarity. Several players were injured, some with broken limbs, others suffering from cuts and bruises. The medical staff moved quickly, improvising bandages from torn clothing and using whatever they could salvage from the wreckage. The coaches barked orders, trying to bring order to the chaos, but the sheer scale of the situation was staggering. No one had ever planned for a disaster like this. In those first hours, survival instincts kicked in. The team huddled together, sharing warmth and strength. They found a relatively clear patch of ground near the crash site and began salvaging supplies, water bottles, first aid kits, even some energy bars that had survived the impact. It was a small victory, but a critical one. Water was their most urgent need, and though the forest was dense, the faint sound of a stream in the distance gave them hope. The survivors faced immediate dangers beyond their injuries. The forest was alive with sounds that were foreign and frightening, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, distant animal calls. The darkness that fell as night approached seemed to close in, thick and impenetrable. For many, the isolation was the hardest part. The absence of any sign of civilization made the silence deafening. Yet the group knew that panic would be their greatest enemy. Leaders naturally emerged. The team captain, a player known for his calm under pressure, took charge of organizing watches through the night, ensuring that someone was always alert. The coaches coordinated efforts to create a makeshift shelter using branches and debris from the plane. Despite exhaustion and pain, the team worked together with a focus born from years of teamwork on the field. Their survival now depended on cooperation, trust, and quick thinking. Communication was another critical challenge. With their radios destroyed in the crash and no cell service in the remote forest, the team was cut off from the outside world. They had no idea if search parties had been alerted or if anyone even knew their flight had gone missing. The uncertainty weighed heavily on their morale. The players, who had once thrived in the clarity of game plans and strategy, were forced to adapt to a reality with no clear rules or timelines. As the first night stretched on, fear tested their resolve. Shadows morphed into imagined threats, and the cold seeped into their bones. Yet the team's shared experience became their anchor. Stories were told around the small fire they managed to build, voices quiet but determined. They reminded each other of the goal: to survive until rescue came. Every player, coach, and staff member carried within them a fierce will to live, a spark that no forest, no storm could extinguish. The survivors knew that the first hours were only the beginning of their ordeal. They had weathered the crash, but now the true test was survival in the wilderness. Hunger, thirst, injury, and exhaustion awaited them. Yet amidst the uncertainty and fear, a remarkable thing was already unfolding. A team united not just by sport, but by the unyielding strength of the human spirit. The days following the crash revealed the true magnitude of the challenge facing the American football team. Surrounded by the dense forest, stripped of comforts and supplies, the survivors faced a primal battle for the most basic necessities: food, water, and shelter. What had begun as a terrible accident quickly transformed into a test of endurance and ingenuity against the raw forces of nature. Water was the most urgent need. Though the forest was thick and seemingly endless, fresh water sources were not easy to find. The faint sound of a distant stream had guided the survivors initially, but the journey to reach it was perilous, filled with tangled roots, slippery moss, and the ever-present threat of wild animals. A small group, including some of the team's strongest and most resourceful players, volunteered to scout the area, returning with precious water and the knowledge of a safer path to the stream. Food, however, was an even greater concern. The team's limited rations had been scattered in the crash, and the energy bars salvaged from the wreckage would only last so long. The athletes, used to consuming high-protein meals prepared by trainers, now had to face the reality of hunger and the uncertainty of what the forest could offer. Some players, recalling camping trips or survival shows, began experimenting with foraging, identifying edible plants, berries, and roots. But the forest was full of dangers. Toxic plants, insects, and animals that could turn a desperate meal into a fatal mistake. Shelter was no less critical. Exposed to the elements, the survivors risked hypothermia during the cold nights and exhaustion during the sweltering days. Using branches, leaves, and remnants of the plane's wreckage, they built crude shelters, lean-tos and windbreaks that offered some protection. The coaches and senior players took the lead, organizing shifts to maintain these shelters and keep watch for any approaching threats. Every night, the team gathered close, sharing body heat and stories to keep spirits alive. Injuries complicated every effort. The medical team worked tirelessly to tend to broken bones, cuts, and infections that threatened to worsen in the humid forest environment. Improvised splints were crafted from wood and fabric, and natural antiseptics were applied from plant extracts discovered nearby. The physical pain was compounded by the psychological strain of their predicament, but the team's resolve never faltered. Throughout this struggle, the leadership within the team evolved. It wasn't just the coaches or captain who guided the group. Players stepped up with unique skills, resourcefulness, and courage. A backup quarterback who had studied botany in college shared knowledge about edible plants. A linebacker with a calm demeanor helped organize the foraging parties. Together, they formed a community driven by survival, relying on each other's strengths like never before. Yet despite their best efforts, the threat of the forest loomed large. At night, strange noises echoed nearby, howls, rustling footsteps, and the team knew they were not alone. Fear was a constant companion, but it was tempered by the fierce determination that had carried them through the crash itself. Each day was a battle, each moment a test of will. Their struggle for food, water, and shelter was more than a physical fight. It was a testament to human adaptability. The athletes, once masters of the gridiron, were now students of the wild, learning lessons far beyond anything in their playbooks. Against all odds, they endured, their bonds strengthened by hardship, their spirits unbroken. As the days dragged on in the dense forest, hope and despair danced a delicate and dangerous waltz among the survivors of the plane crash. While the team fought to sustain their basic needs, another crucial challenge emerged: the desperate effort to communicate their plight to the outside world. Without any working radios or phones, and with no clear idea if anyone even knew their plane had gone down, the survivors faced an agonizing uncertainty that gnawed at their morale. Immediately after the crash, the team had searched the wreckage for any functional communication devices. Unfortunately, all radios were smashed, and their mobile phones, limited as they were in 1999 and hampered further by the remote location, were useless. The coaches and players soon realized that unless they could find a way to signal for help, their survival depended solely on chance and the hope that search parties had been dispatched. This grim reality forced the group to turn their resourcefulness inward, brainstorming ways to attract attention. They attempted to create large SOS signals on the forest floor, clearing brush and arranging rocks and fallen branches into symbols they hoped could be spotted from the air. Some players gathered dry wood and leaves to build signal fires, sending up thick plumes of smoke during the day and bright flames at night. Each attempt was a blend of hope and desperation, each plume of smoke a silent plea for rescue. But the forest was vast and unrelenting. Dense canopy blocked much of the sunlight, making aerial search difficult. Rain and fog often cloaked the area, hiding their signals from any passing planes or helicopters. Meanwhile, the thick smoke sometimes threatened to ignite uncontrollable wildfires, forcing the team to balance urgency with caution. The psychological toll was immense. Every failed attempt chipped away at the fragile optimism that held the group together. Far from the crash site, rescue teams worked tirelessly. Search and rescue pilots scanned the forest from above, navigating the maze of trees and rugged terrain. Ground teams trudged through underbrush, facing exhaustion and frustration. Communication between search parties was often hampered by the same dense environment that hid the survivors. The realization dawned that locating the team would be far more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Back at the crash site, the survivors grappled with the silence. Days passed without a sign of rescue, and despair threatened to unravel their resolve. Arguments and moments of hopelessness crept in, but leaders reminded the group of their purpose: to endure, to survive, to never give up. Their unity became a lifeline against the creeping darkness of despair. Amid the struggle, moments of ingenuity shone through. A player who had grown up in a rural area recalled how to make a primitive whistle from wood, and soon the team used the piercing sound to try to attract attention. Another remembered lessons about mirrors and sun reflections, fashioning one from broken glass to send flashes into the sky during clear moments. These small victories rekindled hope, reminding everyone that survival required not only physical strength, but also creativity and persistence. The battle between hope and despair was not just external, it was deeply internal, a psychological warfare that tested every survivor. The uncertainty of rescue, the isolation, and the harsh environment challenged their mental fortitude. Yet even in the darkest moments, the team found ways to support each other, drawing strength from shared stories, laughter, and the promise that help would come. 7 days after the crash, that promise would finally be fulfilled. But until that miraculous moment, the survivors held tight to hope, clinging to every signal fire, every whistle, every flicker of light that might pierce the vast wilderness and guide rescuers to their side. Trapped deep within the unyielding forest, the survivors of the crash faced not only physical challenges, but an even more formidable foe: their own minds. The psychological battle waged silently but relentlessly, as fear, uncertainty, and isolation threatened to erode the team's spirit. The forest was not just a wilderness of trees and shadows, it became a battleground for hope and despair within each individual. Fear manifested in many ways. For some, it was the terror of injury and death, a primal anxiety sharpened by the harshness of their surroundings. For others, it was the crushing weight of helplessness, knowing that rescue might never come. Nightfall brought with it the darkest moments, when the forest's eerie sounds became exaggerated, and every crack or whisper sparked waves of panic. Sleep was scarce and filled with nightmares, the mind's way of replaying fears over and over. Leadership emerged as a critical factor in maintaining morale. The team captain, whose calm demeanor had already been evident since the crash, took on a role far beyond his athletic responsibilities. He became a beacon of steadiness, encouraging open communication and reminding the group of their collective strength. Coaches reinforced this leadership, organizing routines to give structure to each day, keeping everyone busy and focused. These routines became lifelines, providing a sense of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. The team's shared identity as athletes became a source of strength. They drew on their years of training, discipline, and teamwork, channeling it into their survival efforts. Rituals from their sport, warm-ups, drills, and pep talks were adapted to fit their new reality, helping to keep their minds sharp and spirits lifted. These rituals reminded them of who they were and what they had overcome together, even as the forest closed in. Yet tension and conflict were inevitable. Stress and fear sometimes sparked arguments or moments of doubt. Some questioned the decisions of their leaders, while others struggled silently with feelings of guilt or hopelessness. The group's ability to navigate these emotional undercurrents became essential to their survival. Moments of vulnerability were met with compassion, and the shared experience forged bonds deeper than any played game. Psychological resilience was also tested by the passage of time. As hours turned into days, the waiting became as agonizing as the physical hardship. The survivors grappled with the paradox of hope and despair, holding on to the belief that rescue was coming while confronting the possibility it might not. This mental tightrope walk took a toll, but it also highlighted the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to adapt and endure. In this crucible of fear and leadership, the team found moments of profound courage. Players comforted one another, shared stories of home and dreams for the future, and celebrated small victories like finding fresh water or building a shelter. Humor, even in the bleakest moments, became a weapon against despair. These human connections, forged in the fire of adversity, became the invisible armor that protected them from giving in. The psychological battle was perhaps the greatest challenge they faced. The physical wounds would heal, and rescue was near, but the scars left by fear and hope intertwined would last a lifetime. Through it all, the team's collective willpower shone brightest, a testament to resilience, leadership, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of overwhelming odds. The rescue came like a whispered hope turned into a roaring reality. 7 days had passed since the crash, and the American football team, battered but unbroken, clung to life in the heart of the dense forest. The endless nights, the hunger, the fear, all had brought them to this moment, where the distant sound of helicopter blades sliced through the canopy, a sound that ignited a spark of hope so fierce it seemed almost miraculous. The search crews had been relentless, despite the immense challenges of the terrain. The forest was a maze of thick trees and shadowed paths that thwarted every attempt at a direct approach. Yet, fueled by determination and the unyielding human will to save lives, rescue teams combed the area day and night. Spotters scanned from the air, and ground teams moved carefully, guided by faint clues left by the survivors. The signal fires, the whistle calls, and the SOS signs etched into the forest floor. When the helicopter finally hovered above the crash site, the team's voices, hoarse but full of hope, rose in unison, their cheers echoing through the trees. Relief washed over everyone in an overwhelming tide. Tears mingled with laughter as the rescuers landed and rushed forward. The medical teams sprang into action, quickly assessing injuries and preparing the survivors for evacuation. For many, it was the first time in days that they had seen faces not marked by exhaustion and fear. The extraction was both a physical and emotional ordeal. The dense forest made it impossible to land the helicopter right on site, so stretchers and supplies had to be carefully carried through the rugged landscape. Every step toward rescue was a step away from danger and despair. As the survivors were airlifted to safety, they were wrapped in blankets and surrounded by the care they had long been denied. News of the rescue spread quickly, capturing the world's attention. The story of the American football team's survival against overwhelming odds inspired countless people. Interviews, media appearances, and heartfelt testimonials followed. But for the survivors, the experience was deeply personal. They had faced death together, relying on courage, teamwork, and hope. The bonds forged in those 7 harrowing days remained unbreakable. The miraculous rescue was not the end, but the beginning of a long journey toward healing, physical, mental, and emotional. The survivors carried with them scars, memories, and lessons that would shape their lives forever. Their story became a powerful testament to resilience and the indomitable spirit of humanity in the face of the wildest adversity. If you found this incredible story of survival inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing tales that show the strength of the human spirit. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. There's so much more to discover together. What part of this story moved you the most? Comment below and join the conversation. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories right to your screen. Stay tuned, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.